Hello, my name's Laurel Papworth, and I thought I'd go through the issue that Anthropic had with the Department of War in the United States, and then the response by OpenAI, which allowed OpenAI to win the contract. I thought I'd go through the issue between Anthropic's response to the Department of War's demands on their AI model, and they framed a challenge a lot of organisations will face, and then how OpenAI came in and provided a solution that solves the problem that a lot of organisations will have. So we're going to look at the key features of that. So the first thing that happened was Anthropic said, you can't use our model for mass surveillance of American citizens because of democracy, privacy, democracy, those things. It can actually put private companies at risk. And secondly, you cannot use it for fully automated agentic warfare. So you can't just say, do whatever you want and allow the AI to run. And this is an issue you have in organizations who are looking to fully automate, and is one of the bigger challenges coming up for organizations, especially if they haven't provided accountability and judgment in their AI strategy. So while it's fully understandable what Anthropic's proposing, and they framed the challenge, they didn't really provide any answers for the Department of War. And on the same day, OpenAI stepped in and said, this is our answer, and were able to win the contract. So I'll just go through that with you. I do just want to repeat, though, that Anthropic stood firm and wouldn't waive their ethics as a private company working with government. So the Department of War said, well, we're not going to do mass surveillance, but you can't tell us what we can and can't do, and really responded quite strongly with, you'll be banned from you being used in any government department, not just Department of War. We're going to make things difficult for you. And they're going to order federal agencies to phase out and stop using Anthropic Claude. So this is an issue. So pretty quick, OpenAI jumped in and signed off on classified environments, and I'll go through what that means. And they were also able to put the pressure points in that you need in a strategy, which allows for the concerns that Anthropic very carefully framed, allows for them to be managed in some way at this point in time in AI's evolution. It's an emergent tech, so things are changing. So OpenAI emphasised its own red lines in the contract, notably no mass domestic surveillance, no autonomous weapons targeting, so the same really as Anthropic, no high-stakes automated decision-making, and it used a more layered safeguards approach. So let me be clear on the framing here. A lot of organisations just want automation, and they're not necessarily considering that as you move from a human-centric to a system-centric world, and then the humans become agents within that system, at what point does the decision hierarchy and the priority weighting kick in, or is even not enough, and therefore you need an escalation to human beings? So classically in an organisation, it might be everything can be automated unless it's inferred in the communication that the press are called or will be called, that lawyers are called or will be called, and then that needs to be escalated to a human being. You don't ever want to be in a situation where the AI keeps optimizing when it hasn't got the clearest goals around optimization, or it's usually unidirectional, and there are times when a human being will stop and say, I need to escalate this to management, and an AI won't do that on its own. So there needs to be some form of an oversight. You can put everything in the system that you want, or the functionality, but at the end of the day, AI never takes on board accountability, judgment, shame, blame, guilt. You can't sue the AI. Like, it's always going to be a human who may not have agency inside the system, or it might be a company like Anthropic that has no agency inside of the Department of War's system, so they'll be held accountable perhaps for what the model does, under the aegis of there's no humans involved in any of these autonomous systems. So what did OpenAI offer? Well, first of all, they gave very clear guidelines on the classified environments, sort of the way that the AI or the model would behave and where it would behave. So one is that it must run on OpenAI's infrastructure, which is, I think, Microsoft Azure OpenAI Cloud. I know they were looking at changing, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So no installing models on another computer somewhere in your facility. Given that a lot of these very top models that compete easily with a GPT or similar product are free, open source for commercial use, there's a big shift towards owning your own model. But OpenAI said, if you let us run it, we can put in safeguards that you're looking for. So the provider, the private company, maintains control over inputs, outputs, and execution context. If it's moved offshore into private data centers and things like that, the audit trail disappears, and that can be a big issue. One of the things I know about the Microsoft Azure OpenAI solution is that it provides telemetry. So it provides real-time monitoring. It provides a log of queries, so who's prompting what and what is the output that's coming back, and gives a human or another system, if you must have it, overview of what's being offered, suggested, and where it's going. So instead of being invisible and a black box, the cloud-based solution and the dashboards give detectability, so you can see what's going on. And presumably, if you're in the Department of War, that's a good thing. You don't want the AI making decisions and no human knows why. Obviously, there's update and patch control. So like anything else, Salesforce provides an AI solution to the Department of War as well. They all have a very clear systems. A system-centric world needs dashboard. That's how it's optimized. So it's about having a dashboard to see the optimizations that are happening. It's important to understand at a governance level that the AI isn't a moral judge, not a moral agent. The cloud's not a moral agent. It has institutional enforcement that would not be possible at edge. Again, edge just means private models and things like that. The next one I think is a really important one, which needs to come into every AI strategy, every organization. Every single organization needs this, and that's a personnel hierarchy. So in corporate, we call it a escalation chart. Inside the AI, it's called a decision hierarchy. But there must be personnel that take accountability for different steps of the decision. The accountability and governance gets explicitly humanized. This is something humans do. Because the AI is always optimizing towards a goal, it won't make the same kind of decisions that a human would. And there are times when we must take back judgment, we must take back governance, we must take back accountability and ensure that that is the line that is drawn. And this is the problem that Anthropic was articulating, but it's difficult to solve in every organization. You've got people that just want to automate everything, and then you're like, but what about the staff? And then we're used to holding competing tensions. It's in a liminal space, even though it's uncomfortable, because it's part of the human condition, is to hold, well, we need it speedy but following regulations, or we need it cheap but excellent quality. We need long-term gain over short-term gain, but we need to retain reputation. Like, we've always got lots and lots of parameters we're playing with and we're juggling. It would be, at this point in time, AI cannot make those decisions. Not without some problems anyway. It'll be fine 90% of the time, and then every so often it will just fall on its face and there'll be, issues. That might be fine if you're a small business, but if you're the Department of War, you don't want those issues. It's not that the humans make a call and the humans are watching TV or going out for a boozy lunch. If If AI can do your job and you don't have to give it oversight, then you don't have a job anymore, full stop. So just remember that. Humans review and escalate as judgment is required. So really, this is how the Department of War works. Every chain of command takes responsibility, accountability for what happens on their shift, what happens below them. They've probably got a technical term for it. Or it can be a little trickier with some organisations where executives are so risk averse, they don't ever want to be seen as taking a risk. They never want to take responsibility. They're focusing only on the next quarter or the next financial year. But I would say with Department of Defence, Department of War, they understand personnel escalation. They understand being held accountable not only for yourself but your team as well. If you enforce the chain of command, you have an operator, a supervisor, and then a legal ethical review. What's JAG? I think JAG has something to do with this stuff. But anyway, you get the general idea. Liability and responsibility doesn't vanish in a systems world. You can sit there and say, computer says no, or the computer just did what it wanted, or I couldn't stop it because there was no field for me to put in or checkbox. But at the end of the day, it's the human that's held responsible for what the system does, even if they have no agency within that system. It will remain with the named actors, and those named actors are on the personnel escalation chart list, whatever it is. So this layer ties AI outputs back into institutional authority structures that have legal accountability. It's a governance thing. The AI's decision-making is tied into structures, kind of goes back to legal accountability. So another thing OpenAI offered was a safety stack and provider discretion. You always want prompt filters, model behavior constraints, output sanitization layers, and monitoring for anomalies. I'm just reading them off of the chart because they're pretty standard in systems integration cards, system cards, and also data sheets for AI. One of the challenges we have is they're not static and they do evolve. So the provider retains control. And I thought this was very clever. You can have our model, but we retain the ability to turn something on and off at will. And this is an issue in the cloud because you might be using a tool and then one day they turn a feature off, or they say you have to upgrade and pay to get the additional feature. OpenAI just went, if we don't like it, we're just going to turn it off. And the Department of War agreed to it. They must have thought that they could control it, or, that a good argument was being made for why you would do that. And then my challenge is, if something happens, the Department of War has pushed back to say, well, OpenAI had complete control. They could have turned it off. So when the model tries to do something it's not allowed to do or offends the safety stack pushes back and says, no, you can't do it. And so an example I give of this is if somebody is trying to use secret squirrel information for insider trading and wants to send out an email, an AI that's monitoring email would push back and say you're not allowed to send that information out to those entities because they're not approved to have insider trading information. And I'm thinking of a case here that would have been really useful for. So you can have the AI set up to do policing, but you can set up the safety stack to police the police. Who watches the watchers? I would suggest that safety stacks articulated really, really clearly are part of a governance and regulation sort of bundle that you want to think about. This one was funny. I don't mean funny, haha. I mean surprising. If the Department of War pushes the model into a territory that offends the safety stack, there's a reward mechanism. That's why I'm using the term offend. The provider can clearly turn the service off. If it's going into prohibited domains means like a topic or area, a particular subject, OpenAI can shut the service down. That would be like Starlink turning off all the satellites because it doesn't like what the government's doing in a particular country. Similar. It's a governing condition, it's not just a hope. So it's very clearly part of the contract. The audit trail, which is another function of governance, is that there must be an audit trail. OpenAI have said regular compliance audits, so they have the right to do a compliance audit. Audit logs are to be made available. Release the files. That's going to be interesting. And there are penalties or loss of access for breaches. So it's not enough to put something in the contract that you must do this and you will do this, because when that doesn't happen, what is the penalty? And for a lot of the contracts I've set up, it's been things like, uptime. What is the uptime? But then there's no penalty if there's a downtime that exceeds the uptime. Like, you don't want that. That's inefficient. I'm sounding like an AI now. It's inefficient. So you're looking at the cloud and how that's going to work rather than running it privately or running some models privately or patching some stuff together in the edge. The second one is personnel escalation, the decision hierarchy, chain of command, what's going on there, oversight, I guess. The safety stack, setting up all the guardrails so it doesn't do mass surveillance of citizens either on its own, with a bad actor within the organisation, or as a general directional signal policy. And lastly, contractual enforcement, that there are penalties, including we'll take your toys away from you if you breach the guidelines or break the law, or I don't know. This is going to be private enterprise at war with the Department of War, so that's be interesting. Let me be clear here. You don't outsource judgment to a system, to a model, okay? You just don't. That is the one area that stays within the human domain. You surface risky decisions earlier with telemetry and dashboards and checking what people are prompting and checking the outputs and seeing if the model's behaving, all that kind of stuff. And you tie automated outputs back to human and institutional responsibility, okay? It's practical governance, and this is a perfect case for that. The things that they need to be careful of is that humans can become the weakest link in the sense that they are a loophole. People have a habit of just rubber stamping things that they shouldn't be rubber stamping. It's not about being unethical, it's about training and architecture and double checking things, that sort of stuff. Which is why Department of War, the military are an incredible. The military industrial complex is an incredible business. Look at it as a business. Its chain of command and accountability is chef's kiss. You won't see that in many other organisations. Contract enforcement isn't self-executing. I mean, you probably set up an AI on chain to check the other AIs, but in general, you need human oversight for the monitoring and enforcement of those contracts. Safety stacks can be bypassed. So that's why audit trails and audit logs are super important in case somebody gets a bit gung-ho and decides to bypass the safety rails that are agreed to and it all goes belly up. You need to have some checks and balances for that. Cloud control means provider power, which is political. I know everything's political, but the provider is in a dominant position. So OpenAI, interestingly, was able to snatch the contract away from Anthropic that framed the problem, but then owned the problem and took a political swing and won. So in finality, this is very much where I sit and where I'm interested. Technical constraints, institutional controls, contractual constraints, operational transparency, and the delegation of routine tasks, even automating weaponization, does not mean the delegation of responsibility. You cannot make a system, a tool, accountable. Anyway, it was an interesting case study for me to dig in and have a look in more depth. I think initially I was like, oh, Anthropic, good, and OpenAI, bad. But when I went in further, I really realized, no, Anthropic was right. They framed the problem perfectly. The way that OpenAI came in and offered solutions was pretty well what I would have done, but it's just with so much at stake with the Department of War, Department of Defense, you really have to think through all the accountability issues. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video lecture. Thanks. Bye.